From what I've learned, Donald, I think you would love the checking in with one another and the buzz of the room. A human life is sacred. It is sacred in its being born. It is sacred in its living, and it is sacred in its dying. We are gathered this afternoon to celebrate the life of Donald Bernard Gibson and to remember the remarkable person that he was. We've been called together by death, the end of a good person's life, Donald's life. And though we will mourn, for mourn we must, let this also be a time for remembering the person that he was. And let this be a time for affirming the kind of life he lived. Let this be not so much a time for brooding upon his death, but a time for celebrating his life. On behalf of Donald's family, thank you for being here today, and on behalf of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Princeton, welcome. For those of you joining here in person, I know we have those of us that are online. In our time together, our house is your house. In the words of Howard Thurman, I share with you the agony of your grief. The anguish of your heart finds echo in my own. I know I cannot enter all that you feel, nor bear with you the burden of your pain. I can but offer what my love does give. The strength of caring, the warmth of one who seeks to understand, the silent storm-swept barrenness of so great a loss. This I do in quiet ways, that on your lonely path you may not walk alone. Our hearts unite this afternoon in shared support of one another as we remember Donald. We invite Donald's grandchildren, Olivia, Bear, and Mac, who will light the candle of remembrance. And as they do so, we share these words from Michelle Buhite. We bless you on your journey, Donald. We honor and celebrate the life that has been yours, the lives that you've touched, the legacy you leave. We release any old wounds and regrets. We forgive and are forgiven. We cherish the life we shared, the life that is larger than us. Out of mystery we are born, and mystery receives us when we die. With sorrow and gratitude for all that has been, we bless you on your journey. Donald died peacefully at his home in Princeton on November 18th at the age of 90. He is remembered by his partner, Linda Fitch, his former wife, Joanne Gibson, his sons, David and Douglas, and grandchildren, Olivia, Baird, and Mac, as well as many colleagues and good friends. Donald Bernard Gibson was born in Kansas City, Missouri on July 2nd of 1933 of Oscar J. and Florine C. Myers Gibson. He received his bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Missouri in Kansas and his PhD from Brown University. Over his long academic career, he taught at Wayne State, the University of Connecticut, Brown University, Harvard, and Rutgers. In 1972, his 20th century interpretations of modern Black poets was published. In 1974, he was on the editorial board of the Black American Literature Forum, and he retired from Rutgers in 2001. Professor, author, critic, during his lifetime, a particularly notable achievement was his creation of a university course previously unknown in our colleges, and that was of African American literature. During 40 years of teaching and scholarship through his books, essays, articles, and public lectures, Donald helped to establish the study of literature created by Black writers as a legitimate university course. As he has written, When I was a student during the 1940s and 50s, Kansas City was entirely segregated. And so all of my teachers, the school staff, and even the janitors I knew were Black. My teachers took the time to teach us about Black history, Black literature, and Black culture. The whole effort of the system and our teachers was to prepare us to attend college and be successful there. By the time he completed high school in 1951, the University of Kansas City was becoming integrated and he was invited to apply. As an undergraduate, Donald found for the first time he was a member of a minority group in school because his teachers, along with most of his classmates, were white. Though an exemplary graduate student at Brown, he had been so in schools throughout his life. Superior grades, strong recommendations, it didn't lead to many job offers for Black scholars. He once wrote, "It was 1962. Segregation and some of the first rumblings of racial unrest resulted in limited job opportunities for Black men, even well-educated Black men. I was finally hired as an assistant professor at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Shortly after his arrival in Detroit, he met Joanne Ivory, whom he married in 1963. In December of 1963, he received a Fulbright Fellowship to teach in Krakow, Poland, where they lived from 1964 to 1966. They welcomed their first son, David, in October of 1966 after returning to Detroit, and Donald in the same year to Wayne State, where he proposed to teach African American literature. Through the years, he had been steadily building an extensive collection of books by African American authors, but his proposal met with resistance as it was a subject that most white academics knew nothing about. After some effort, he was permitted to teach one course on African American literature at the graduate level. In 1967, he took a position as an associate professor at the University of Connecticut, where he was encouraged to teach classes, that's important, in African American literature there. Douglas, his second son, was born in Connecticut in January of 1970. And also in 1970, he was awarded a study grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and a research grant by the American Council of Learned Services. He also accepted an appointment to the editorial board of the Langston Hughes Society Journal. In his retirement, his travels took him to Senegal and South Africa, where he lectured at local universities. His final years were spent in both Princeton, New Jersey, and in Isle Lamont, Vermont, with his partner, Linda Fitch. Not only was Donald a distinguished academic, he was a man of many interests and talents. Most people would remember his humility. He never would have written this long list of achievements, and his unending kindness. His sly humor and shoulder-shaking laughter was well known to all who knew him. He loved folk singing and was an excellent tennis player well into his 80s. He was a carver of wood and also a carver of his famous smoked turkeys. Gibson's legacy will live on as the notable scholar of African American literature, distinguished by his introduction to the world of some of the great writers of our time. More so, he will be deeply missed by family and his host of friends and colleagues. Linda will lead us now in the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, a song that was sung often with Donald and others up in the barn in Vermont. It was intended for his son Douglas to join Linda on the guitar. Unfortunately, he's in hospital and unable to be with us today. We hope he is joining us online, and we're sending our care and love to you if you are. But we feel his presence with us in spirit. And you can find the lyrics to join along on the back page of your order of service.
Donald and I were always singing, and
lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will feel no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.
Friends, it's a great pleasure for me to be here to say a few words at my friend Donald's celebration of life. You've already heard from the Reverend a little bit of the facts about Donald's background and what he's accomplished in his life. But many of you will be interested to know that some years ago, I've just discovered this, he gave an interview to a group called Contemporary Black Biographers. And there is a full biography of Donald's in the encyclopedia.com. You may want to make a note of that, encyclopedia.com. And it's compiled not only from information that they gathered, but apparently from a number of interviews that Donald had given to them, in which he talked about his father and growing up in Kansas City and the ups and downs of his life. So if you want the facts, you can go there. I want to speak more personally, though. Some of you know that I actually preceded Donald at Rutgers. I joined the faculty there in 1972, also for the purpose of beginning to introduce into the university canon information about the African-American experience, not just African-American literature and politics and history and so on, but that was sort of the hat that I wore when I joined the faculty. Donald came to Rutgers in 1974, and because he was in a similar field, he was in the English department, but we were all sort of, there were only a handful of us, so we knew each other. And I won't repeat, but he went on to become a leading authority and contributor to the field of English, African-American English. In fact, his accomplishments were so great that he was promoted to the rank of professor at Rutgers. We call it Professor II. In ordinary language, that means distinguished professor. Some of us are just ordinary professors. Donald was a professor too. And one of the things that you'll hear in a minute, that we spent some really happy times together. And one of the things I remember most clearly about him telling me was that how from a very, very young age, now after I read this biographical piece, I now think it may have been due to, in part, to his parents and siblings. But he didn't mention that. He said from a very young age, he'd always had an interest in scholarship and learning. And that it sort of, it came to him like water comes to a duck. It was, he couldn't think of doing anything else. That's what life was for him: learning, teaching, scholarship. And I always envy that because, you know, few of us have the luxury of coming into the world sort of knowing what it is we're destined to be. But Donald knew that scholarship and academia was his destiny. Although we did meet, we were not particularly friendly. I don't mean we were unfriendly, it's just that we didn't hang out together very much in the early days. Not until the 1980s. And that was due largely to the fact that we both had children, as did other people, have children in Princeton school system. And as you know, there's only one high school, and everybody at the high school knows everybody else. And then that leads to the parents knowing everybody else. And we were not so aged at that time that we still liked to party. So we used to we used to, the parents used to occasionally organize dance parties, actually. And it was in those events that I really got to interact more with Donald. But even that didn't really mature until tennis. We both have a passion for tennis, and we both found each other on one occasion at the community park tennis courts taking lessons. And from then on, it was sort of downhill. And we played often at Jadman Gym. And as you've already heard, Donald was a pretty good tennis player. And what was amazing, what gave him his strength on the court was his speed. Now, Donald's legs weren't that long, but he could really move. And so we all were, it was hard to get a ball that he couldn't get to. And it was sort of around the tennis and tennis playing that our relationship really developed. You can imagine two middle-aged codgers playing in July at 90-degree heat on community park courts. It was not probably a wise thing to do, but we enjoyed it. And the message I want to send to you is that it wasn't so much the tennis, but you don't play straight through. You take a break, you have between sets, you have water, etc. And it was in these moments that I spent with Donald that we began to get to know each other and share our experiences and so on. And I want to convey to those of you who are here, the children, his former wife, his partner, Donald, it's difficult to say how much Donald loved you. And this came through, obviously, if you're sitting around, you talk about your kids and your life and this, that, and the other. And so there was a message that came through, and that was the message. So I want you to go away feeling the love, very deep love that Donald had for you. One of the highlights of my relationship with Donald was in 2001 when he retired from the English department at Rutgers. I went to that retirement party and I was impressed. I mean, everyone was there. It was joyous and celebratory, not that he was going, but for what he had accomplished. And as a matter of fact, the gift that the department gave to him upon his retirement was a set of carving tools, the very ones that he used to carve the statues that are outside and that he used for many years. His dream was to develop that skill. And in that connection, he made his first trip to Africa to learn from the masters. He and Linda spent some months in Senegal. I think there were both ups and downs in that experience, but anyway, it was very, very, very good in terms of Donald's wishes for himself. And after that trip in Senegal, he came to Cape Town, South Africa, where I was staying. I had a grant to allow me to live in Cape Town and do research in South Africa. It was there that I experienced the full depth of Donald's warmth and compassion, kindness. And it happened in this way. I was in a very, very unhappy marriage at the time. And it was painful. I felt I had no one to talk to, and I didn't know what to do. You can imagine how confusing that was. And so during the visit in Cape Town, one morning, Donald and I went down to Main Road in Cape Town, if you know that place, and not far from the University of Cape Town, and we had coffee. And I just let it all out. He was the only person that I could talk to about my deep feelings and distress and so on. You will not be surprised to hear that my troubling times were met with great compassion and kindness and gentleness from Donald. And later, of course, from Linda. So I've been the recipient, very grateful recipient of many of the virtues that you all know and that we're talking about as regards to Donald. Let me end, you know, I'm a professor, I could go on forever. Let me end on a very happy note. This is the way that I will remember Donald. And I think this is the way some of you will want to remember Donald. As you know, for the last months, Donald spent most of his time in bed. As some of you may also know, there were moments when he had difficulty getting it together, following thoughts and so on. I was visiting with him maybe a month or so ago, 6 weeks ago, and trying to make conversation, basically. Struggling to make conversation because he would tune in and tune out. So finally I said to him, Donald, by the way, are you still doing meditation? I mention this because decades earlier, Donald had introduced me to meditation. So I said, Donald, are you still doing meditation? Thought a minute. Then he said, no, I don't need it anymore. I am at peace.
David chicken back. Oh, did he? I am not David Gibson. We originally thought that perhaps David would be willing to share some memories of his dad, but you chickened out, right? He's coming. Oh,
It's you now.
The real David Gibson.
I thought we had to change the program for a second there. I just told Excuse me. I just told Walton I wanted to thank him for such a wonderful speech. And yes, I did go to high school with his daughters. We all knew each other. So before talking about my brother, about my father, sorry, I need to still gather myself here. So my brother Doug isn't here today. He went to the hospital on December 14th. As you know, my father passed away November 18th. And Doug's been in the hospital since then. Complications from a condition. He had an operation a week or two ago. He's been getting better. My mother saw him this morning, and but we're very pleased that he's on the mend, and we think he may be in hospital for a couple more weeks, but that's the reason that he's not here. Otherwise, of course, he would be. So Walton already touched upon this, and I just wanted to talk about this for a second. So Walton was talking about my father's love for school, for academics, and it wasn't because of brothers and sisters or anything like that. It was something that was in him. It was in his DNA that when you find something that you like, something that you love, and you stick with it. And my dad just loved school. And how do I know that? Because I had a conversation with him a number of years ago. Dad, what are you passionate about? And he said, I never worked a day in my life. He said, being a college professor is more than I ever could have thought it would be, because he says, I'm in school all the time. Having a chance to do research and, the teaching and interacting with young people, but he really loved to dive into the research. The folks, so my childhood friends are here, they knew, because most of these guys have known since third grade, since I was about 8 years old, and they knew when they came over to our house, and if they saw the study or any room in the house, there were books just everywhere, books everywhere. One thing though about my dad's sense of humor is that in his study, I used to love going in his study, just with books everywhere and that old Smith Corona typewriter. But his sense of humor, someone gave him, it was a man made of like a Budweiser can, and the face was wooden, and it was sort of painted, drawn in with a red nose and sort of a tin hat. The body was the Budweiser can, wooden legs. And when you grabbed the body, the Budweiser body, and you lifted it up, this wooden penis would come out. And I'm just, Dad. It's just this goofy sense of humor. Yes. Goofy sense of humor. But he loved books. He loved academia. And he loved all literature. It wasn't just Black literature, African-American literature. He had a love for all literature, and he really prided himself in knowing in depth about all kinds of literature. And so he felt most energized and comfortable in school. Some of my earliest memories, and Douglas's too, probably more so mine because I'm 3.5 years older than he is that sometimes Dad would have lectures, and Doug and I, when we were little, we might have to wait in a conference room or something. And so we were given remember those little the light blue booklet that you'd take tests in? Well, he'd give those to Doug and I, and we'd make stories, or, we'd draw things and we'd color them in. And when I went to college and I had to use one of those for tests, I just drew cartoons, just because that's what I used to do. But I do remember that Smith Corona typewriter that he used frequently to write, countless things. He made his own bookshelves. I was talking about how there were books in, I mean, even the bathrooms, there were just books everywhere. So we had friends, Doug and I like to read comic books, and we had friends when we were growing up that their parents wouldn't let them read comics. And my dad would say, of course you can read comic books. You should read comic books. It's reading. Reading is reading. And the more you read, the better off you are. And so I don't follow the Avengers anymore. There's way too many movies, but I did do a lot of reading of comic books as a kid, thanks to Dad. Read all kinds of things, thanks to him. And I do remember seeing Stephen Crane books all over the place. Didn't know who Stephen Crane was until I got to high school and started learning more about that. So I remember a trip when we were younger, a trip we made as a family to Providence. Walton was talking about how Dad got his PhD from Brown. And so he took us to the Brown campus and he wanted to show us where he used to live. And so we go to the old neighborhoods, and the whole thing is concrete. Like there's nothing left. It's just concrete. And but he would tell us stories about his old friends, Jay Blair, Mike and Carol Resin, Phil Bailey, John Head, and others, that they would make beer, you know, as their good times. That as children, we got to know some of his graduate friends by making trips to the beach. We go to Maine when I was younger, but later on we go to Westport Point. You remember that, Westport Point, Mom? Crabs, lobster, beer. It's probably why I live in Florida now, because I love the beach so much. I remember Jay Blair visiting and from Switzerland, and we did a fondue. It was my first taste of raclette. Dad had a unique voice, and he had this infectious laugh. It was alluded to earlier, but you remember he'd laugh and you know, he'd do that. He was, I mean, warm. He was a gentle man. He rarely got angry, got mad a couple of times, rarely got angry. And even when he did seem like he was kind of angry, he'd hold it back a little bit. One time though, Doug was in middle school, and his friends bet him money. They all ponied up money, and they gave him, I don't know, like $60 or something like that if you went to the barber and got a mohawk. And so he did. He went to the barber, he got a mohawk, and I saw him before he went in the house, and I was like, oh my God. And I went in the house first before he did. I said to Dad, I was like, Dad, Doug got a mohawk. And he's like, no, he didn't. And then Doug walks in, and I've never seen my dad flip out like that ever before. Dad got so angry, he punched a hole in the wall. I swear, Dad's this tall. He punched a hole in the wall, and we covered that hole with a picture. I think that hole may still be in the wall now after all these years. Another time you might remember he had those old Mercedes. He had a 1966 and 1967 Mercedes that I don't remember why. I never had a chance to ask him why he got those cars, but he really liked those cars, and he had just gotten them. And so I think a couple of us were sitting in the car. I was in the car. John was in the car. I think Peter, were you in the car too? Were you the third person? He's, I don't know. We're in the car, and you know, Dad's got it started, and the heat's on. You know, he's ready to go, stick shifter or whatever. And John's like over here with the radio, trying to figure it out, whatever. And my dad's like, John, don't touch the controls. And here we are, like 40 years later, we still joke around about that. Don't touch the controls. Tennis was always a big part of his life. We've talked about that ad nauseum. I will say those tennis ball cans when we went on road trips were very handy. Didn't have to make pit stops. I'll just leave it at that. But he played tennis from the time before I was born. I think he started playing tennis in graduate school. He'd always have rackets around, always have tennis balls around, and sometimes my friends and I would grab a couple of rackets and some balls. Maybe we'd get some chalk, draw a line in the street, just sort of an impromptu game of tennis, or, you know, we'd go to community park with Dad. Doug and I would hit balls around, hit them against the wall sometimes, and he'd teach us some things. He got Doug and I lessons. And I remember like some of the names, and unfortunately, I don't know if some of these folks are around anymore. I know Dad, sometimes he would play singles and sometimes he'd play doubles, but there was sort of this pantheon of these tennis names, including Walton Johnson, of course. You know, Chuck McVicker and Don Blankenbush, and like the names, I'm sure you remember some of the names too. The names, you know, went on, and you hear Dad talking, yeah, I went out and I played against, you know, blah, blah, blah. Did you win? You know, I'd always ask him if he won. And apparently, I guess he did. He was humble, so he didn't really talk about that very much. He was humble. But even, like, he got to an age, in his 80s, 82, 83, and he started getting vertigo, and he couldn't play tennis anymore. And it was killing him. He would watch tennis for a while, and, you know, sometimes he wouldn't watch. Linda knows better than anybody. But you know, he would still play tennis in his mind. I'd talk with him on the phone, and he would still play tennis in his mind. He really loved. He was really passionate about the game. There was a period of time. So I grew up in Princeton. We moved to Princeton when I was probably about 74. So I was 7, 8 years old. And so my oldest friends are from that time, and then high school, some more friends. And so between then, like high school, sort of college age, we would have friends. I would have friends over. Doug and I would have friends over. To be honest, Doug and I would have friends over. All right, we're underage, whatever. My dad's 90, he's dead. He knows he can talk about that. Right, Dad? He loved it. We'd have like a keg, like on the back porch, and we would just sort of hang out. Like Dad sometimes he was sort of legendary also with his cooking. He was trying to make like this fried chicken, but have it baked so it was healthier. And, you know, so he'd experiment with us sometimes. He'd do these different things with wings and chili and stews and stuff. And sometimes he would join us in conversation on that back porch, because, you know, we're having, you know, laughs and good conversation and stuff. And to a man and to a woman, my childhood friends, upon learning about my father passing away, they all talked about the different fond memories that they had spending time with my father, because it wasn't just Dad saying, you know, hey, hi guys, you know, have a good night, you know. It's my father, it's Don Gibson. Like, he would have real conversations with my friends. Like, we're 17 to 22 years old, you know, through the years, and you know, he really got to know my friends as people, and my friends got to know my father as a person. And I'm thankful that they got to know him as a person, because he was an amazing person, and I feel he knows. Yes, I'm finally wrapping this up. I'm not a college professor, but I can talk too. I was in sales for a long time. But Dad knows that for the longest time, I felt like his achievements and his accolades were so high that I couldn't come close to trying to be him. And before he died, over the summer, we had a conversation about Now I wanted to make him proud. Yeah, sure. I didn't get my bachelor's till I was in my 30s, and I'm going to finish my MBA in May this year. But he told me that's not what made him proud of me. He was just proud of me and proud of my brother. Just for who we are. That my father passed away in his sleep. And may we all rest in peace the way he did. No pain. He slept well. Thank you all for coming. I didn't want to take any more of our time. Thank you. Oh, one quick thing. Dad, I'm shilling your book on Amazon. Abroad with My Boys by Donald Gibson on Amazon about our trip to England. Thank you.
Hi, and my name is Siobhan, and I'm married to Walton Johnson. And what we're doing now is just some of the people who couldn't come have sent messages remembering Donald. And this message comes from a lady who lives in California, and her name is Joyce Greenberg Lott. So these are her words. I wish I could be with you to remember and celebrate Donald, but I can unfortunately no longer travel. I tell my friends in California how I used to play tennis with this great guy, Donald Gibson, once a week, but I'm not sure they believe me. Now I walk slower with a walker. It wasn't just the tennis I loved with Donald. It was the conversation afterwards. We sat next to each other on the bench and not only took on the problems of the world, but also the problems in our lives. In many ways, I grew up with Donald, our divorces, my remarriage, our kids, and no matter what balls we missed, on the court or in our lives, we ended up continuing to play and laughing at our missteps. Donald fed me with his presence. He also fed me with some of the best food I've ever eaten. Little did I know, after I married my second husband, Gary Lott, who was also a talented cook, that he and Donald would enter a cooking competition. Gary and I played doubles tennis with Donald every Sunday morning, after which we drank beer and ate through the great calamari cook-off. Donald and Gary, thrilled that unlike most seafood, calamari was still reasonably priced, brought competition calamari recipes to our patio. I would never vote on who was the winner, I just ate. Donald was the most generous friend. For gifts, he brought me tons of tennis balls and tons of shrimp. But he also brought me his lively, tender spirit and wonderful stories. Even though I live across the country, he will never be out of my heart or my mind.
Remembering Donald Gibson by Nadamai Shanti, a.k.a. Nicole Gilbert. I had the unique opportunity of living at Fisk Farm with Linda, Donald, and many other wonderful friends from 1999 to 2002. As I grew to know Donald, I learned that he was a skilled wood carver, a master chef, and a great singer. Rumor had it that he was also a professor of literature, author, and editor. This all sounded very serious, important, and intimidating to me. Only I didn't know Dr. Gibson. I only knew my friend Donald, a kind man with a ready joke and a terrific sense of fun. Like the night I caught him rubbing basil on his cheeks as he was heading up to bed. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was trying it out as an aphrodisiac. He told me the same thing. It doesn't work. On another occasion, I told him about a conversation I had with a visitor to the island who was flying the Confederate flag. The visitor remarked that he had wished he'd been born 200 years earlier in the South. Donald said, "I wish he'd been born then too, and I wish he'd been born black." Even today, I can still see Donald's shoulders shake with laughter. Singing was a daily pastime at Fisk Farm. Together with Donald, Linda, and many friends and visitors, we would sing songs like "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," "Angels Watching Over Me," "Michael, Row Your Boat Ashore," and on and on. My favorite of all, though, was "Oh Freedom," and it was one of our special duets. Linda would play the guitar, and we would sing it as loud as we could from the depths of our souls. There aren't many experiences in my musical life that can even come close to the power of those times. When Donald and I sang this together, I really did feel free, and I think he did too. There's another song that Donald taught me, but it had a very different tone. It was called "Oh Captain." Perhaps it should be said that at times, Donald could be quite competitive. I cannot remember how our little singing competition evolved, but over time, we sang "Oh Captain" together. We started trying to see who could hold the longest note with one breath. This could be quite challenging, and more than once, I was dizzy with effort and oxygen deprivation. It should be said that Donald, who was 44 years my senior, was very fit. In our singing contest, however, I had youth and operatic training on my side, and I got the better of him more than once. The last time we dueled was in 2011. There was a delightful, albeit primitive, recording of this event, which we will show today at the end of the service, will we? Oh, good. That night, I may have won the prize for the longest held note, but he stole the show with his playful humor and natural showmanship. Thank you, Donald, for sharing your joy, humor, music, art, and love with the world. My life has been enriched by our time together.
Now that Donald is gone, during these difficult days, it has helped me to remember that he lived to be 90, an impressive feat by any standard. He grew frail throughout the last days of his year of his life, but up to that time, he was healthy and active. We sang folk songs to the very end. Just yesterday, I finally took my guitar downstairs out of our bedroom, where it had been for the last several months during his decline, and I put it back in its usual home under the piano. We may not have been officially married, but it was a wonderful relationship lasting for some 25 years, during which we lived together, laughed together, traveled together, sang together, and I can only be grateful. I met Donald in a book in 1970, years before I actually met him. To back up, I was getting a master's degree in history, during which I took a course in racial relations in America. I undertook to write a paper to be entitled "The Concept of Soul in American Literature." The most valuable resource that I found was a book entitled "Five Black Writers," essays on Wright, Ellison, Baldwin, Hughes, and Leroy Jones. The editor, someone by the name of Donald Gibson. I had never heard of him, but the book was a great help in writing the paper. Years later, at a party in Princeton, I met that same Donald Gibson. He was a professor of English at Rutgers, interesting, a great listener, and one of the funniest people I had ever met. And among his many publications, I discovered he was the editor of the book that had been so valuable to me years ago, Five Black Writers. We began talking, then dating, and when summer approached, I invited him to my family's summer home in Vermont. I wondered, how would a black man, city-born and bred in the urban context of Kansas City, Missouri, now a sophisticated writer and academic living in Princeton, New Jersey, be received in white, rural Vermont? Not only did it work out, but it seemed that he was received with acclaim. In the supermarkets in the nearby town where we shopped, clerks were more than polite. They opened doors, helped with grocery bags. People smiled. We were more warmly greeted in restaurants than I would have been by myself. Some days later, oh, I'm going to skip this, okay. It was 25 years of laughter and singing, and very notable were some pretty great travel adventures in West and South Africa. In 2001, early in our relationship, he decided to spend 3 months out of a Rutgers sabbatical in Senegal and asked me to come with him. Our time in Senegal was very special, with a whole series of adventures, particularly as a mixed-race couple. We did not live in the American-European section of Dakar, but in an African neighborhood where it was assumed, to Donald's great annoyance, that being white, I was the one with the money. At one point in our journal, he writes, on the way to some stores, we pass a beggar who holds his hand out for money. I put my hand in my pocket and pull out the 3 largest coins I have, 500 seifas. I bend down and place them in his outstretched hand. He looks up, the beggar looks up with a smile of gratitude and says to Linda, "Merci, madame." I resist the temptation to snatch the coins back. Racist ingrate. This is something that he wrote later on. He was so insulted. During the summer of 2022, while we were in Vermont, Donald began showing signs of frailty. I was concerned to be of some such distance from his doctor, so we came back to Princeton in September, earlier than we had planned. He became weaker and spent more time in bed. In the summer of 2023, having turned 90 on July 2nd, he entered hospice, where in the course of the next few months, hospice care extended from 3 to 5 days a week. I kept my guitar in the bedroom, and for quite a while we sang every day. He loved and was so proud of his boys, David and Douglas. David was at some distance in Florida and was not easily able to visit. Doug, living close by, was able to visit, and indeed, he played and sang for his dad just a few days before his father's passing on November 18th. So, how am I? I'm sad, of course, and I'm grateful. I had 25 years of a loving partnership filled with adventure, friends and family, lots of singing, an undue amount of laughter. I was blessed, and I will forever be grateful for those years with Donald. Thank you.
We hope you will continue on in your sharing together at our reception after the service, because our presence here on this earth remain through all who remember us, by those who loved and watched and shared our life journey with us. Those memories are alive. They are unbounded by the events of birth and death. As living memories, we possess the greatest gift one person can give to another. It's in each of you that the living memories of Donald's life are committed. To your hearts and minds go the enduring remembrances of his life. So let's just take a moment of quiet. Use these moments to remember Donald, Don, as only you can. And enter this time with reverence and with love. We honor all of these living memories that have arisen from our hearts of Donald and the love that we continue to hold for him.
I'm now going to read to you a prayer that our old pastor, Deborah Bremer, wrote for Donald. So let us pray. Dear divine spirit, essence of life, we thank you for the life you gave to Donald Gibson. Donald was born in a stable family. We thank you for the heartbeat of his mother, the first sound he felt rolling through his tiny body as he was woven and tailored in the womb. We thank you for his entrance into this vivid world and the reaching hands of his brothers and sisters touching his soft skin, the mighty hold of his father's arms, the oohs and ahs as the Gibsons welcomed him into the family. We thank you for the intellect you blessed him with, a mind that always looked for what was new, what was connected, what was fascinating. The mind powered Donald happily through school. Again, in a stable, productive, positive community. We thank you for the doors that opened and his shiny, bright-eyed self ventured out into higher education. We thank you that he landed in a world where people were paid to discover and wonder and take the time to look back and say, what was that? And why? And how? We thank you for the luxury of the love that came floating into his life, his own young family, his boys, his wife, the schools, the books, the awards, his place in the faculties. We thank you for his vivid imagination that saw a field of study where no one else had paused to consider that African American literature might be a jewel worth spending a lifetime on. We thank you for the books and the articles and the critiques on students' papers and the comments on his colleagues' essays and the conversations. We thank you for the art and the music, carving, cooking, crafting that surrounded him throughout his life. We thank you for conversations all of us engaged in deeply with Donald. We thank you for Linda, who came into his life and again brought a stable of artistic, sensitive, spiritual souls that relished who Donald was and is for us. We thank you for all the things he tasted, for the air he breathed, for the different lands he walked on, for the love he made, for the skies he witnessed, for the phases of the moon, the warmth of the sun, for the feel of laughter shaking his body, for those he hugged, for those he held, for those he honored, for those he wept with, for those he argued with, for those he found the way with. And now, as Dr. Donald Bernard Gibson passes into the saints of light, may he continue to shimmer in our memories and shine with generosity across the heavens. We pray this in the name of all that is powerful and good. Say amen. Amen.
I invite us to join together in a responsive reading, which is printed in your order of service. You'll respond with the words in italics. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, in the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them.
In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn. In the beginning of the year and when it ends. When we are weary and are in need of strength. When we are lost and sick at heart. When we have joys we yearn to share. Says so long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us. We remember Donald. And we will deepen that remembrance of Donald. As was shared a bit earlier, we have the joy to hear his voice now in this recording of O Freedom, which comes from the album Walk to Dawn, in which he was invited to join his friend Nicole Gilbert, now known as Nanayami Shanti. And let's just feel his spirit and his essence as we hear them together in a song I understand is sometimes and we'll hear "O Captain" during the reception, which was that song of which they would play off, trying to hear those extended notes. But for now, "O Freedom." After the service, Donald's family invites you to join them for a reception, which will be just outside the doors here in our Robinson Lounge. And we thank the great circle of friends who helped organize and prepare the reception, as well as our congregation's Women's Alliance for helping to host. I invite you to join me in a closing prayer, after which please join us in a joyful rendition of "O the Saints." In celebration of the great gift of Donald Gibson, let's send him off with joy. Spirit of life, God of many names and understandings, which highest is always love, we will extinguish this candle as we say goodbye to Donald's physical presence in our lives. Our prayer is for those of us gathered, in which his spirit and memory remains, in which his light continues to burn. We ask for love and companionship, for the presence of this community to support one another in grief and sadness. And as the tears inevitably will come, we remember the joy and meaning Donald brought to our lives as our partner, our father, our grandfather, our colleague, our friend, to all of us, a beloved one. May love and light remain with Donald's family and friends as you leave this time and place, so you may be there for one another in all the moments and the places yet to come. Amen.